What if I told you that every single person watching this video right now shares the same incredible origin story? A story that began 300,000 years ago in the heart of Africa and changed the course of our entire planet forever? Welcome to the most extraordinary journey in human history, and you're about to discover secrets that will completely transform how you see yourself and everyone around you. Before we begin this mind-blowing adventure together, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button if you're ready to uncover the truth about your ancestors. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because this channel brings you the most incredible stories from human history that you won't find anywhere else. And here's something amazing. I want to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is in your country right now. Drop a comment below and tell me your location and local time. Let's see how far our human family has spread across this planet since we all began in Africa. Are you in New York at midnight? London at 5 a.m, Tokyo at noon? Mumbai at 3 p.m? I want to see our global community unite right here, right now. This is The Great Journey from Africa to the world. And what you're about to learn will blow your mind. Picture this. It's 300,000 years ago. The world looks nothing like it does today. Ice sheets cover much of Europe and North America. Sea levels are 400 feet lower. And in the heart of Africa, in a place we now call the Rift Valley, something absolutely revolutionary is about to happen. Our story begins not with kings or empires, but with a small group of early humans who would change everything. These weren't the first humans. Homo erectus had already been exploring parts of Asia for nearly 2 million years. But these were different. These were US, Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans. When we look at the fossil evidence from sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco and Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, we see something remarkable. These early Homo sapiens had brains virtually identical to ours today. They had the same cognitive potential, the same capacity for language, art, and complex thinking. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Despite having the same biological potential as us, these early humans would remain in Africa for over 200,000 years before successfully colonizing the world. Why? The answer lies in the incredible diversity of Africa itself. Our ancestors weren't just surviving in one environment, they were mastering them all. From the lush forests of Central Africa to the harsh Kalahari Desert, from the Mediterranean coasts to the Ethiopian highlands, Africa is essentially a laboratory for human evolution. You have every possible ecosystem represented. Deserts, rainforests, savannas, mountains, coasts. Early humans had to develop incredible adaptability just to survive in their homeland. Recent archaeological discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of these early Africans. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, we find 75,000-year-old ochre engravings, some of the earliest known human art. At Pinnacle Point, we discover evidence of early humans harvesting seafood from the ocean 165,000 years ago. But perhaps most remarkably, we now know that these early humans were already experimenting with long-distance trade. Obsidian tools found in Kenya can be traced to volcanic sources over 200 miles away. Our ancestors were creating social networks and exchange systems that spanned hundreds of miles. What we're seeing is not primitive survival, but sophisticated adaptation. These people were innovators, artists, traders, and explorers. They were fully modern humans in every sense. Imagine standing on the shores of the Red Sea 70,000 years ago. You're part of a small group, maybe just a few hundred people, facing an impossible choice. Behind you lies drought and starvation. Ahead lies the unknown. Recent genetic research has revealed something extraordinary. Every single person alive outside of Africa today descends from this one small group of migrants. We are all quite literally cousins. The genetic evidence is absolutely clear. All non-African populations show signs of what we call a population bottleneck around 70,000 years ago. We're talking about maybe 1,000 to 10,000 individuals who left Africa and became the ancestors of billions. But how did they cross the Red Sea? For decades, scientists debated this question. Then, geological evidence provided a stunning answer. During the Ice Age, sea levels were much lower. The Red Sea, which today is over 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, may have been just a few miles across. Some researchers even suggest there might have been a temporary land bridge. We found evidence of ancient shorelines that are now 300 feet underwater. The geography was completely different. What seems impossible today might have been just a difficult but manageable journey then. But making the crossing was only the first challenge. The Arabia they entered was not the harsh desert we know today. It was a green, relatively lush landscape, with lakes, rivers, and abundant wildlife. Archaeological sites like Jebel Faya in the United Arab Emirates have yielded stone tools dating to 125,000 years ago. Evidence that humans had been experimenting with leaving Africa long before the successful migration at 70,000 years ago. What we're seeing is that the successful migration wasn't their first attempt. Early humans had been testing the waters, so to speak, for tens of thousands of years. The 70,000-year-ago migration succeeded because the environmental conditions and human cultural innovations finally aligned. These early migrants brought with them revolutionary technologies, advanced stone tool techniques, sophisticated hunting strategies, and perhaps most importantly, the cognitive ability to plan for and adapt to completely new environments. As they moved through Arabia, they encountered landscapes unlike anything their ancestors had ever seen. But instead of being overwhelmed, they thrived. Genetic markers tell us that within just a few thousand years, these pioneers had reached the Eastern Mediterranean, modern-day Iran, and were preparing for the next phase of their incredible journey. But they weren't just moving, they were changing. Each new environment demanded new solutions, new technologies, new ways of living. The humans who had left Africa were already becoming something different from those who stayed behind. 65,000 years ago, a small group of humans stood at what might be the most significant crossroads in our species' history. Behind them lay the familiar territories of the Middle East. Ahead lay two massive continental landmasses, Europe and Asia, each promising vastly different challenges and opportunities. The choice they made would determine the future of human civilization. They chose Asia. This wasn't just a geographical choice. It was a strategic one that would prove to be absolutely brilliant. While Europe remained largely locked in ice, Asia offered a corridor of opportunity stretching from India to Australia. Dr. Michael Petraglia, Asian prehistory expert. The movement into Asia represents one of the most successful colonization events in human history. In less than 20,000 years, humans went from the shores of India to the islands of Southeast Asia and even reached Australia. But this journey was far from easy. The migrants faced challenges that would test every aspect of their adaptability. The first major obstacle, the monsoon climate of India. Unlike anything their ancestors had experienced, the Indian subcontinent presented them with extreme seasonal variations. Months of torrential rain, followed by months of severe drought. At sites like Jwalapuram in southern India, we find evidence that our ancestors didn't just survive this climate, they mastered it. Tool technologies show rapid innovation and adaptation to local materials and hunting opportunities. Dr. Sheila Mishra, Indian paleoanthropologist. The artifacts we find show a people in transition. They're taking the technologies they brought from Africa and rapidly adapting them to completely new environments and prey species. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Asian journey was the speed at which it happened. Genetic evidence suggests that humans reached Southeast Asia within just 10,000 years of leaving India. This wasn't random wandering, this was purposeful exploration. And we know this because of what they accomplished next. One of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. 50,000 years ago, early humans in Indonesia did something no other animal had ever done. They looked across 60 miles of open ocean to the landmass of Australia and decided to cross it. Professor James O'Connell, maritime archaeologist. This wasn't an accident. You can't accidentally cross 60 miles of ocean. This required planning, sophisticated boat technology, navigation skills, and incredible courage. These were the world's first mariners. The boats they used have long since decomposed, but the evidence of their crossing is written in our DNA and in the archaeological record of Australia itself. When humans arrived in Australia, they found a continent unlike anywhere else on Earth. Massive marsupials roamed the landscape. Giant kangaroos the size of horses, marsupial lions, and the terrifying megalania, a 20-foot monitor lizard. Within just a few thousand years of human arrival, most of these giant species had vanished. Whether through hunting, climate change, or habitat modification, human arrival marked the beginning of the first major extinction event caused by our species. But humans didn't just survive in Australia, they flourished. Aboriginal Australians developed one of the most sophisticated hunter-gatherer cultures ever documented, with complex social systems, incredible artistic traditions, and environmental management techniques that sustained them for 50,000 years. Professor Lynette Russell, Indigenous Studies. Aboriginal Australians represent the longest continuous human culture on Earth. Their innovations in everything from fire management to astronomical knowledge rival any civilization in human history. While their cousins were conquering Asia, another branch of humanity was preparing to face perhaps the greatest challenge yet. Ice Age Europe. 45,000 years ago, Europe was a continent in the grip of ice. Massive glaciers covered Scandinavia, the British Isles, and much of Central Europe. The Mediterranean was smaller, the climate was harsher, and the landscape was dominated by vast grasslands and sparse forests. But this harsh environment wasn't empty. It was already home to another type of human, the Neanderthals. Dr. Svante Pääbo, ancient DNA researcher. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they weren't entering virgin territory. Neanderthals had been successfully living there for over 200,000 years. They were perfectly adapted to the environment. The meeting between modern humans and Neanderthals represents one of the most significant encounters in human history. For thousands of years, these two human species coexisted, competed, and as we now know from DNA evidence, interbred. Sites like Château-Perronien in France show evidence of cultural exchange. Neanderthals adopting modern human tool technologies, while modern humans learned cold weather survival techniques from their Neanderthal neighbors. Professor Marie Soresi, Paleolithic archaeologist. The relationship between Neanderthals and modern humans was complex. There's evidence of both cooperation and competition. They were learning from each other, but perhaps the most remarkable evidence of early European humans comes from an unexpected source: art. In caves like Chauvet and Lascaux in France, early Europeans created some of the most sophisticated art ever produced by prehistoric peoples. These weren't crude drawings. They were masterpieces that rival anything created by later civilizations. The Chauvet cave paintings, created 36,000 years ago, show incredible artistic sophistication. The artists understood perspective, shading, and proportion. They depicted movement and emotion with startling realism. Dr. Jean Klotz, cave art specialist. These paintings prove that early European humans had complex symbolic thinking, spiritual beliefs, and artistic sensibilities that were fully modern. They were artists in the truest sense, but creating art was just one aspect of their remarkable adaptation to European conditions. Archaeological sites across the continent reveal incredible technological innovations. The Gravettian culture, which spread across Europe between 29,000 and 22,000 years ago, developed sophisticated hunting techniques specifically designed for the massive herds of mammoth, reindeer, and bison that roamed the European steppes. At sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of the world's first ceramic technology. Not pottery, but fired clay figurines created 29,000 years ago. These Venus figurines, found across Europe, represent some of humanity's earliest attempts at standardized artistic expression. Their meaning remains debated, but their widespread distribution suggests shared cultural concepts across vast distances. Professor Randall White, Upper Paleolithic specialist. The Venus figurines represent something unprecedented in human history, a shared artistic tradition that spanned thousands of miles. This suggests complex communication networks and cultural exchange, but perhaps most remarkably, Europeans were developing technologies that wouldn't be seen elsewhere for thousands of years. 20,000 years ago, our ancestors faced what might have been the end of their incredible journey. The planet entered the last glacial maximum, the coldest period in over 100,000 years. Ice sheets over a mile thick covered most of northern Europe and North America. Global temperatures dropped by 10–15 degrees Celsius. Sea levels fell by 400 feet. Vast areas of the planet became virtually uninhabitable. For the small populations of humans scattered across Eurasia, this was an extinction-level event. Many populations were cut off from each other for thousands of years. Some groups disappeared entirely. Dr. Connie Mulligan, population geneticist. Genetic evidence shows that human populations went through severe bottlenecks during the last glacial maximum. Many lineages that had existed for thousands of years simply vanished. But in certain areas, scientists call them refugia, small groups of humans not only survived, they continued to innovate and adapt. In southern Spain, the Solutrean culture developed the most sophisticated stone tool technology ever created. Their laurel leaf points were so thin and perfectly crafted that modern flint knappers struggle to replicate them. Professor Lawrence Strauss, Solutrean specialist. The Solutrean points represent the absolute pinnacle of stone tool technology. They required hundreds of hours to create and represented a level of craftsmanship that borders on art. In Eastern Europe, humans developed an entirely different survival strategy. They became mammoth specialists. Sites like Mezhirich in Ukraine reveal incredible innovations. Entire houses built from mammoth bones and tusks. These weren't temporary shelters, but sophisticated permanent dwellings that could house extended families through the harshest winters. The engineering required to build these structures was remarkable. A single dwelling might use the bones of over 100 mammoths, arranged in complex patterns that provided both structural integrity and insulation. Dar Oleksandr Kornienko, Ukrainian archaeologist. These mammoth bone houses represent some of the most sophisticated architecture of the Paleolithic period. The builders had to understand principles of engineering, thermodynamics, and resource management. But perhaps most remarkably, they were developing technologies that wouldn't become common elsewhere for thousands of years. At Sungir in Russia, archaeologists discovered 28,000-year-old burials containing the most sophisticated clothing ever found from this period. The deceased were buried wearing garments decorated with over 10,000 ivory beads, each one individually carved and polished. The time investment represented by these burials is staggering. Researchers estimate that creating the bead decorations alone would have required thousands of hours of work. Professor Randall White, Paleolithic archaeologist. The Sungir burials represent something unprecedented: the investment of enormous communal labor in honoring individuals. This suggests complex social hierarchies and belief systems. But the most important innovation might have been one we can barely detect in the archaeological record: enhanced cooperation. Surviving the last glacial maximum required unprecedented levels of social coordination. Groups had to share resources across vast distances, maintain contact despite harsh conditions, and work together in ways their ancestors never had. Genetic evidence suggests that despite being separated by hundreds of miles and hostile terrain, European populations maintained enough contact to prevent inbreeding and share crucial innovations. Quick pause in our journey. If you're enjoying this story so far, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button so more people can discover the history of our shared human story. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell, because trust me, the next chapters of this journey are even more mind-blowing. Oh, and I've got a challenge for you. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of humanity's journey fascinates you the most so far. Was it the first migration out of Africa, the crossing into Australia, or maybe the incredible cave art in Europe? I'll be reading through your answers, and I can't wait to see which part of our shared story sparks your imagination.
Imagine standing on a vast, wind-swept grassland that stretches to the horizon in every direction. Massive herds of mammoth, bison, and horses move across the landscape. This isn't Africa or Asia. This is Beringia, the 1,000-mile-wide land bridge that once connected Siberia to North America. 15,000 years ago, this land bridge was humanity's gateway to the last uncolonized continent on Earth. But crossing it would require everything our ancestors had learned about survival in the harshest environments on the planet. Dr. Ben Potter, Alaskan archaeologist. Beringia wasn't just a pathway, it was an entire ecosystem. People didn't just cross it, they lived on it for thousands of years, developing unique cultures and technologies. The humans who entered Beringia weren't the same ones who had left Africa 55,000 years earlier. They were the survivors and descendants of the last glacial maximum, the most environmentally tested humans in our species history. They brought with them sophisticated cold weather technologies, complex social organizations, and most importantly, the confidence that comes from having overcome seemingly impossible challenges. But entering the Americas presented entirely new challenges. The landscape was teeming with megafauna unlike anything humans had encountered. Giant ground sloths the size of cars, saber-toothed cats, American lions, and short-faced bears that stood 12 feet tall on their hind legs. Professor Gary Haynes, megafauna specialist. When humans first entered the Americas, they encountered the most dangerous predator community that had ever existed. These weren't just large animals. Many of them were specialized predators that had never seen humans before. Yet within just 1,000 years of their arrival, humans had not only survived these dangers, they had spread from Alaska to the southern tip of South America, a distance of over 10,000 miles. This represents one of the fastest continental colonizations in human history. But how did they do it? Recent archaeological discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of this process. Sites like Monteverde in Chile show that humans reached South America by at least 14,500 years ago, just 500 years after the ice-free corridor opened in Canada. Dr. Tom Dillehay, Monteverde archaeologist. Monteverde proves that the first Americans weren't just big game hunters following mammoths. They were sophisticated people with diverse survival strategies, using everything from seaweed to medicinal plants. But perhaps most remarkably, genetic evidence suggests that this entire continental colonization might have been accomplished by fewer than 1,000 founding individuals. All Native American populations show signs of this founding bottleneck, yet they rapidly diversified into hundreds of distinct cultures and societies, each perfectly adapted to their specific environments. In the Pacific Northwest, people developed sophisticated marine technologies, creating some of the world's earliest plank houses and ocean-going canoes. In the Southwest, they became master desert survivors, developing dry farming techniques and cliff-dwelling architecture that wouldn't be matched elsewhere for thousands of years.
12,000 years ago, in the rolling hills of what we now call the Fertile Crescent, a small group of humans made a decision that would change the course of history forever. Instead of following the herds they had hunted for millennia, they decided to stay in one place and grow their own food. This wasn't just a change in lifestyle, it was a complete transformation of what it meant to be human. Dr. Melinda Zeta, agricultural origins specialist. The agricultural revolution represents the most significant transformation in human history since our species first evolved. It changed everything. How we lived, how we organized society, even how we thought about ourselves. But why did this revolution happen when it did? After 290,000 years of hunting and gathering, what suddenly made agriculture possible? The answer lies in climate. As the last ice age ended, global temperatures stabilized for the first time in over 100,000 years. Seasonal patterns became predictable. CO2 levels rose, making plant growth more robust. For the first time in human history, the climate was stable enough to make long-term agricultural planning possible. But climate alone wasn't enough. Archaeological evidence shows that the transition to agriculture required sophisticated knowledge that took thousands of years to develop. At sites like Abu Huraira in Syria, we see evidence of a gradual transition. People were first managing wild grain stands, then selectively harvesting, then finally domesticating entirely new varieties of wheat and barley. Professor George Wilcox, archaeobotanist. Domestication wasn't an accident. It required detailed knowledge of plant biology, careful seed selection over many generations, and the commitment to stay in one place long enough to see the results. But agriculture didn't develop in isolation. Remarkably, it emerged independently in at least 7 different locations around the world, each developing unique crops and techniques. In China, people domesticated rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans and squash. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa. In New Guinea, bananas and yams. Each region's agricultural revolution was perfectly suited to local conditions. Dr. Peter Bellwood, agricultural archaeologist. The independent development of agriculture around the world shows that this wasn't a lucky accident. When conditions were right, humans everywhere had the knowledge and motivation to transform their relationship with the environment. But agriculture brought unprecedented challenges. For the first time in human history, people were living in permanent settlements with hundreds or even thousands of neighbors. This required entirely new forms of social organization. How do you distribute resources? How do you resolve conflicts? How do you coordinate the labor needed for planting, harvesting, and food storage? Archaeological evidence suggests that early farming communities developed increasingly complex social hierarchies. Leaders, specialists, and social classes emerged for the first time in human history. Agriculture changed everything. From tiny farming villages, humanity took its first steps toward building cities, nations, and eventually civilizations that would dominate the world. By 6,000 years ago, along the fertile banks of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus and the Yellow River, something extraordinary was happening. People were no longer just surviving. They were creating organized societies with governments, religions, and monumental architecture. What we see in the archaeological record is the birth of complexity. Cities like Uruk in Mesopotamia weren't just population centers. They were hubs of innovation, administration, and culture. The invention of writing marked the beginning of recorded history. For the first time, humans could preserve their knowledge beyond a single generation. Clay tablets, carved stones, and painted scrolls allowed information to flow across time and space. With writing came laws, literature, trade networks, and the ability to govern thousands, even millions of people. Humanity's story had entered a brand new chapter, but here's the breathtaking truth. Whether in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, or ancient China, all of these civilizations shared the same starting point: the tiny bands of Homo sapiens who first walked out of Africa 70,000 years earlier. From there, our story exploded into the diversity we see today. Thousands of cultures, languages, and traditions, all connected by one unbroken human journey. The legacy of our journey, think about it. Every language spoken today, every building standing in every city, every technological innovation that defines our world, all of it traces back to those early humans in Africa who chose to walk, explore, and adapt. We are artists because of those who painted the caves of France. We are sailors because of those who crossed to Australia. We are survivors because of those who endured the last glacial maximum. And we are builders because of those who planted the first seeds of agriculture. The story of humanity isn't about where we ended up. It's about how far we've come together. And the most astonishing part, our story is still being written today. By you, by me, by all of us. So now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? What time is it in your country right now? Let's celebrate how far our family has traveled across the earth. If this journey through the history of early humans inspired you, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of humanity's incredible story. Because this right here isn't just history. It's our story, and it's only just beginning.